What are the things they've been carrying that maybe they don't want to carry anymore?
I felt very empowered personally walking out of that theater.
Hello everybody, happy Friday. You may have already heard that Blake Lively had 10 of her 13 claims against Justin Baldoni in the Wayfarer parties dismissed by Judge Lyman in the Southern District of New York on April 2, 2026. The ruling came in the form of an opinion and order about 30 minutes before a scheduled hearing, meaning that by the time proceedings began, most of the case had effectively been stripped down. Several major claims, including certain harassment allegations and multiple retaliation-related claims, were either dismissed or significantly narrowed, and some claims against individuals like Jennifer Abel and Melissa Nathan were dropped entirely. The speaker explains that while many people have already reacted to the 152-page decision at a surface level, they plan to go deeper into the specifics during a live stream later, but for now are offering a high-level summary. Referring to their own notes after personally reviewing the document, they outlined the judge's reasoning step by step, starting with the contract claims. There were two contracts in dispute, the so-called AILA and CR agreements, and the judge first addressed the AILA, ultimately dismissing all related claims. The primary reason was that a key condition precedent was never met. Blake Lively never signed the agreement, meaning the obligations of the opposing parties were never triggered. Additionally, even if the contract had been valid, she failed to fulfill her own obligation under it, which required providing notice of any alleged breach and allowing a 30-day period to cure it. Instead, she reportedly gave little to no proper notice and filed suit almost immediately, because of both a lack of execution and failure to follow the required notice and cure process. The AILA-based claims were dismissed entirely. However, the second contract, referred to as the CR, did not suffer from these same issues, and the judge indicated it would be treated differently moving forward. The judge clarified that at this stage, he would not make a final determination on whether the CR contract had actually been breached, but he did conclude that Blake Lively presented sufficient evidence for the matter to proceed to a jury, meaning the claim survives and will move forward into the next phase of litigation. Importantly, this surviving contract claim applies only to the entity associated with the film. It ends with Us Movie LLC and not to the other defendants. In the case overall, the listed defendants included Justin Baldoni, Jamie Heath, Steve Sarowitz. It ends with Us Movie LLC, Melissa Nathan, the agency group, and Jennifer Abel. But the court made it clear that this particular CR-based claim is limited solely to the movie entity. Out of the original 13 claims brought by Lively, 10 were dismissed, leaving only 3 remaining, with this contract dispute being one of them. The judge emphasized that allowing the claim to proceed does not mean a violation. Has been proven only that there is enough evidence for a reasonable jury to evaluate the issue and reach a conclusion based on the facts presented at trial. The court then turned to the critical question of Lively's employment status, which played a major role in the dismissal of several other claims. After reviewing the nature of her role in the film, the judge determined that she was not legally an employee under applicable statutes, but rather functioned as an independent contractor in her capacity as both an actress and a producer. This distinction is significant because many employment laws, including federal protections under Title VII and various California labor statutes, are specifically designed to apply to employees, not independent contractors. The judge pointed out that Lively exercised a high degree of control over her work, had significant creative input, and operated with a level of independence that is inconsistent with traditional employee status. Additionally, there were jurisdictional complications, as much of the alleged conduct did not occur in California but instead took place in New Jersey, where the film was primarily shot, further weakening her reliance on California-based legal protections. As a result of these findings, Lively's harassment claims were dismissed in their entirety. These claims had been brought under employment-related legal frameworks, which required a plaintiff to qualify as an employee, a threshold the court found she did not meet. Because she could not establish that status, the legal foundation for those claims collapsed. However, the judge drew an important distinction when analyzing her retaliation claims. While those claims also failed under Title VII and standard California labor laws for the same reason, lack of employee status, they were treated differently under the California Fair Employment and Housing Act under FEHA. The scope of protection is broader, and the law allows for retaliation claims even when the individual is not formally classified as an employee. The judge noted that the statutory language does not strictly limit protection to employees and can extend to individuals who experience adverse actions in response to certain protected activities. Because of this broader interpretation, Lively's retaliation claims under FEHA were allowed to proceed, making them another key component of the remaining portions of the case that will continue to trial. The judge went on to explain that the key reason Blake Lively was allowed to proceed with certain retaliation claims comes down to how the law itself is written. Looking specifically at the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, the statute uses very broad language stating that it is unlawful for any employer or person to discriminate against any person for opposing prohibited practices or participating in related proceedings. That wording is crucial because, unlike harassment claims under the same legal framework, retaliation claims do not require the individual to be classified as an employee. In other words, even though the court determined that Lively was an independent contractor rather than an employee, she still qualifies as any person under this statute, which allows her retaliation claims to move forward. The court specifically found that there are genuine issues of material fact that need to be decided by a jury, meaning there are important disagreements between the parties that cannot be resolved at this stage. This doesn't mean the judge believes retaliation actually occurred, only that a reasonable jury could potentially see it that way based on the evidence presented. At this phase, Lively's burden is relatively low. She simply needs to show that there is a legitimate dispute over key facts, and the judge concluded that she met that threshold. As a result, the retaliation claims survive, but only in a limited scope. They move forward against It Ends With Us Movie LLC and possibly Wayfarer. While claims against individuals like Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel were dismissed, the agency group remains involved as an entity, although the court allowed it to seek dismissal again later, meaning its status in the case is not fully settled. The judge also emphasized an important legal boundary regarding public relations and reputation management. He acknowledged that Justin Baldoni, like anyone else, has the right to defend himself publicly, hire crisis PR teams, and respond to allegations of and indirectly through media channels. However, the court noted that there is a line where such conduct could potentially cross into unlawful retaliation. Determining whether that line was crossed in this case is not something the judge can decide now. Instead, it is a fact-intensive question that must be evaluated by a jury. This is why the so-called smear campaign issue remains central to the surviving claims. The judge is not ruling that any smear campaign occurred or that it was illegal, but rather that a jury could reasonably interpret the actions of Baldoni and associated parties as retaliatory under the law. Ultimately, while many of Lively's original claims, especially those related to harassment, were dismissed due to her status as an independent contractor and jurisdictional issues, the retaliation claims persist because of the broader protections built into FIHA. These claims now form a core part of what remains of the case, focusing heavily on whether actions taken by the defendants in response to Lively's complaints cross from permissible self-defense into unlawful retaliation. The next phase will likely revolve around these factual disputes, with the jury tasked with deciding whose version of events is more credible. The judge then addressed the aiding and abetting retaliation claims, making it clear once again that he is not deciding whether retaliation actually occurred, only that it could have occurred, and that it's ultimately up to a jury to determine the truth. Because of that, the related aiding and abetting claims were also considered, but with important limitations. These claims had been brought against individuals like Melissa Nathan and Jennifer Abel, as well as the company TAG, the agency group PR. However, the court dismissed the claims against Nathan and Abel in their individual capacities, explaining that under the California Fair Employment and Housing Act, liability for aiding and abetting retaliation applies to employers, not individual employees. Since they were not employers themselves, those claims could not proceed against them. TAG, however, remains in the case for now, as the aiding and abetting claim against the company survived, although it was dismissed without prejudice, meaning TAG still has an opportunity to argue for dismissal again before trial. At this point, the remaining claims in the case are very limited. Out of the original 13 claims brought by Blake Lively, only 3 survived. The first is the CR contract dispute against It Ends With Us Movie LLC, where the court found enough evidence for a jury to decide whether a breach occurred, without making any final determination itself. The second is the retaliation claim under FHA, which survives only against the corporate entities It Ends With Us Movie LLC and Wayfarer, not against individuals like Justin Baldoni or others named in the lawsuit. The third is the aiding and abetting retaliation claim, which currently remains only against TAG, though it may still be dismissed later, depending on further arguments. All other claims were dismissed for various legal reasons. For example, the failure to prevent harassment claim failed because Lively was not considered an employee, which is a necessary requirement under the statutes she relied on. The false light invasion of privacy claim was also dismissed because New York law governing that aspect of the case does not recognize false light as a valid legal claim. Defamation claims on both sides were thrown out as well. Statements made by attorney Brian Friedman on behalf of the defendants were deemed protected because they related to an ongoing legal proceeding. And similarly, statements made by Lively and media outlets like the New York Times were also protected for the same reason. The judge essentially applied the same legal principle to both sides. Discussing a case you are involved in, even publicly, does not automatically amount to defamation. Finally, the conspiracy claim was dismissed because conspiracy cannot stand alone as an independent cause of action. It must be tied to an underlying unlawful act. Since most of the underlying claims, such as harassment and false light, were dismissed, there was nothing left to support the conspiracy allegation. In summary, the case has been significantly narrowed. What remains is a contract dispute, a retaliation claim under FIHA against corporate entities, and a potential aiding and abetting retaliation claim against tag. The central unresolved issue now. It revolves around whether the alleged smear campaign or related actions crossed the legal line into retaliation, something the judge has made clear. It is not for him to decide at this